all the AP Environmental Science exams that I've seen. And unfortunately, with AP Environmental Science, they don't release a lot of the multiple choice tests. In AP Biology, they've started releasing the multiple choice part every single year like they've always done with the free response, but not in AP Environmental. So some of these questions are going to be kind of old, and I apologize for that. They just released the latest multiple choice question last year. That was the last one that was released. But that's going to be y'all's mock exam, I think, so I couldn't put any of those on here. But anyway, they always start with between 20 to 30 questions that are matching. And one thing to remember on matching is that for College Board, and I think it's true for all AP Science classes, you can use some of these choices once, more than once, or not at all. And that kind of sucks, but that's the way College Board does their questions. So normally I would start off and that's the way we're going to do it today, but ask y'all some questions and see if y'all can tell me what y'all think the answer or is, and then talk about why that's the correct answer and why the other ones are not the correct answer or anything like that. So let's just take a look at number one. So our choices are sulfur dioxide, lead, ozone, hydrocarbons, and particulates. So what do y'all think is the most often cited as the causative factor for acid deposition? A. Exactly. Excellent. Excellent. Why A? It creates sulfuric acid. Excellent. So one thing to remember, and I've seen this question a bunch, when you're looking at fossil fuels, right? Fossil fuels, there are three main fossil fuels: coal, oil, and natural gas. Coal is the worst of those as far as environmentally and health-wise. It's the dirtiest. And there are several things that happen when you burn coal. Anything that's in coal, that when you combust it or oxidize it, it's going to produce a lot of different kinds of oxides, but it also can release things like heavy metals that are in the coal and it goes into the atmosphere. So always remember that sulfur oxides are associated with burning coal, and you also will associate mercury with burning coal, even some radioactive elements with burning coal, and of course CO2, a greenhouse gas, and particulate matter. All those are associated with burning coal. Now with gasoline, like from oil, you're going to associate particulate matter, as with all fossil fuels. You're going to associate carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas, as with all fossil fuels. But you typically, when you burn gasoline in your car or truck, you're going to be producing nitrogen oxides. And those can react with water vapor in the atmosphere. And instead of forming sulfuric acid like sulfur oxides do, it forms what? Nitrogen oxides react with water vapor and turn into what kind of acid? Not sulfuric acid, but nitric acid. Yeah, exactly. So I have seen all those as test questions. So nitrogen oxides from burning gasoline, that reacts with water vapor to turn into nitric acid. And then sulfur oxides from burning coal reacts with water vapor and turns into sulfuric acid. And if we have time, we'll talk about what does that matter. It's not like you walk outside when there's acid rain and your skin melts off. That's not going to happen. But there are a lot of things that it can do to the soil and water and wildlife and everything. All right, so what these numbers mean right here, this is from the 2003 exam, and 75% of the students that took it in 2003 got that question right. All right, so which one of these is implicated in human neurological damage? B. Excellent. See, y'all haven't even covered this yet, and y'all know this stuff. So lead is one of the heavy metals, and when you get over to across the hall, he's going to cover health and human hazards with you, and I put into the PowerPoint some tips about heavy metals, and I'll go ahead and share it in case he doesn't get to it. They love to ask questions about who cares if heavy metals are in the environment or get into your body. There's all kinds of heavy metals: arsenic, selenium, mercury, lead, right? The FRQ, if y'all get to it over there, it'll ask you to name one of these things and where does it come from and what does it do to you. So here's something that I always tell my students to remember. if they ask you, what does this heavy metal do to a human's body? There are like 3 or 4 things that all of them do. And then after that, it's kind of specific, like, well, this one hurts your kidneys, this one does your liver, this one blah, blah, blah. But they all cause learning disabilities. They all cause brain damage. They all cause neurological disorders. So if you can remember those, you've got it for any heavy metal, because they all do that. So that would be something you could get a point for in an FRQ. And I want to point this out too. So you'll probably already know that there are 50 multiple choice questions that will be on the AP exam. And then there'll be a break, and then you'll have 4 free response questions or essays. Those essays are always going to be, each one will be out of 10 points, right? And an average score is about a 4 or 5 out of 10. And on the multiple choice part, it's a 50% is passing. So if you get into that test and you think, crap, I only know like every other question, I'm going to fail this. A 50% is really good. You're going to get a 3 probably. So don't get upset or disheartened and think you're not doing well. That's expected. They have some really hard questions on the test. They have some really easy questions because they want everyone to fall somewhere in between. And so I'm getting off the subject a little bit, but these are test-taking tips. So when what I always tell my students is go through those 50 multiple choice questions and answer the ones that you are pretty confident in. Answer those first, because the easy questions count just as much as the super hard ones. So go through and get the ones you feel pretty confident in, then go back and answer the rest of them. And if you have, sometimes they'll put on there a question where you have to do all these calculations on a multiple choice. I would skip it. Come back to it if you have time, but it doesn't count any more than any of the rest of them. So don't waste too much time on any one question. And on the FRQs, if you can get just 4 points, you're doing pretty good. So don't look at an FRQ or essay and think, man, I don't know any of this hardly. Well, you probably are doing pretty good. You don't know it. But anyway, all right. So on that FRQ, it says, where might you get or be exposed to lead? Well, first of all, what's it found in? What do we find lead in? What? I couldn't hear.
Water.
Well, it is found in buckshot and stuff. That is, and that was, you could get a point for that on the rubric for that year. Y'all know that all the questions are online with the rubrics, right? They're released every year. So you go to this, you can Google it and pull up the rubric, and that's exactly what they grade it by, is that group rubric. Don't know if your teacher wanted me to tell you that, but anyway. Anyway, y'all may have heard a lot recently about toys from China being recalled and things like that. Well, in China, they don't have, it's cheaper to make stuff over there a lot of times because they don't have to follow the same environmental regulations that we do. And so, they often will ship stuff over here that has lead in it. And you know how nasty kids are. I mean, they'll stick anything in their mouths. They'll eat dirt, Well, they'll chew on their toys and stuff like that, and then they get lead in their bodies. And children, they breathe and consume and drink more per pound of body weight than an adult does. And their immune systems aren't as developed. So they're more vulnerable, and so you have to watch out for that. In the another important thing you will know or have to know for the test is that the Clean Air Act, that you will have to know, there are like 6 major environmental laws and regulations you should be responsible for or know. One is the U.S. Clean Air Act. And most of them pretty much tell you what they do. Of course, it was designed to clean up the air. It was passed in the 70s, and there were 6 main pollutants that were to be regulated in the United States. And lead was one of them. And that's because they were finding an alarming amount of lead in the blood of children back in the 70s, like me. And so it used to be in gasoline, it was a fuel additive. I remember going up to the gas pump and I would beg my mom to let me pump the gas because I love to smell the gas. It was not good, But we didn't know things like that back then, but I love the smell of gas. So I guess I was huffing at age, what, seven or something? That's not good, I shouldn't even joke about that. But anyway, but the pump would say leaded or unleaded. Those are your choices, you know. We used to put lead in paint also. And so if you live in a really old house, then you may have paint on the walls that has lead in it. So those have been banned and outlawed now, so it's getting better. In fact, you know, my students are always like, man, Mr. Johnson, you're so full of gloom and doom, you know, talking about environmental stuff. But there are some success stories. The Clean Air Act actually cleaned up our air here in the U.S. so much. That outdoor air is cleaner today than it was in the 70s. So that's really good news. So you can do things to make things better in the environment and for the human health. But the problem is that the EPA has said that one of the biggest threats to human health as far as air pollution now is indoor air pollution. Because we're starting to spend more and more time indoors instead of outdoors. You know, you probably have heard your parents or grandparents say, well, my mom and dad would kick us out of the house and wouldn't let us back in until the sun went down, you know, go play outside. But now we're indoors almost all day. School, work, home, car, you know. So any of the volatile things that are in the air, you're breathing in. So that's one of the biggest concerns. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. All right, so considered harmful in the troposphere, but beneficial in the stratosphere. Have y'all talked about the major layers of the atmosphere yet?
Yes.
Okay, what's the sphere closest to the Earth? Troposphere, yeah. And then stratosphere, and then mesosphere, and then excellent. You guys are good. All right, so what is considered harmful in the troposphere but beneficial in the stratosphere? Ozone. You guys are good. All right. So ozone is ozone is ozone. So we often will say, well, that's bad ozone, or that's good ozone. Ozone is O3. It's 3 oxygen atoms covalently bonded together. That's all. So ozone is ozone. It's where it is that makes the difference. Because in the stratosphere, where we want it, it's allowing for life on Earth as we know it. Life didn't even come out onto the land until after photosynthesis evolved to put O2 in the atmosphere, which then, because of the sun's rays and lightning, split the O2 into O and O, and some of those combined with O2 to form ozone for the first time ever, and it built up. And then in the fossil record, you see life on Earth, right? So anyway, it filters out harmful UV rays that can cause mutations in your DNA, which can lead to all kinds of things, including cancer, right? So, however, when you burn gasoline in cars and trucks and all that stuff here in the troposphere, then you're going to be releasing ozone. And ozone is a very, very strong oxidizing agent. In fact, some of you may have drinking bottles that have, it'll either say reverse osmosis filtered or microfilter, or they used to say ozonated, because they would bubble ozone gas up through the water because it's such a strong oxidizing agent, it would kill the bacteria and viruses in it. But anyway, ozone can also react with chemicals and form photochemical smog, which of course requires energy from the sun. That's the photo part, and ozone and some other things we'll talk about in a moment. Oops. The major air pollutant that electrostatic precipitators are designed to remove from power plant smokestack emissions. What do y'all think? E. Did you say D? Not D. E. But D was a good guess. If you have not covered this, then how would you know? So, I'm going to wait to explain this one because there's some slides that show pictures of it. Is there like a thermostat in here or something?
Yeah, it's right here.
Are y'all
Hot?
hot?
Yes. It's in that box.
Can you just pull it off?
Yes. It breaks.
Okay. Okay, so here's another multiple choice. Critics of incineration of municipal solid waste suggest that it may not be the best solution for the future, for which of the following reasons. So I'll give you all a second to read through those. do y'all think? Yeah, D. So, of course, when you burn stuff, you're going to produce air pollution, no matter what it is, right? Y'all probably didn't know this. All the trash in Madison County, that includes Huntsville City and Madison City, all of it goes to Covanta Energy. It's a waste energy incinerator. Do you remember like Toy Story 2 or 3 with the big claw, you know? That's what they do. And I always take my students there on a field trip to watch it. It's really interesting. But there are things that you can do to put into the plant that will take out a lot of pollution. They do it with coal burning power plants as well. And we'll talk about that too. Which of the following actions would be the most effective in decreasing acid rain and acid deposition problems? And I'll tell you, there's several up here that would help, but the most effective. Exactly. And let me say this. If they love this type of question also. If you ever see a question where it says something like, how can we ensure that there's plenty or enough water for everybody, or enough energy for everybody, or reduce acid rain or whatever? If one of the answer choices is to reduce the use of fossil fuels or conserve water, conserve energy, that's always going to be the best answer, every single time. Because that is always the cheapest, it's always the most environmentally friendly, and it's always the best for your health. So, you may have heard your parents say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. You know, you can spend a little bit up front to put those scrubbers into the smokestack and things like that, that will do a world of good in the long run. I'll give you another example of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So the Exxon Valdez oil spill, which was up in Alaska, and it ruined this beautiful, pristine area. It ran aground, spilled all the oil. So now those oil tankers have to put this double liner in the hull, and that costs several $100,000, right? Well, that's an ounce compared to the cleanup cost if it wrecks and didn't have those liners, because it costs multiple millions of dollars. So it's always better to prevent or cut back on waste than it is to have to go in and clean up afterwards or whatever. Okay, let me talk about these though. Using higher smokestacks, yeah, that does help that location, but it's still going to get out there into the atmosphere and cause problems elsewhere. You might could develop acid-resistant crops. Well, that might be working for the crops, but you still are going to have problems with acid rain in the soil and water. You can add lime to neutralize acidified lakes, but you can mess up the chemistry of the lake, if you do that. And then relocating power plants to areas of lower population density. Well, that's hard to cite. When they say it's hard to cite a landfill, for example, that means it's hard to pick an area where nobody's going to pitch a fit, if you put it there. So finding that location plus the expense in relocating, that's just not very practical either. All right, although ozone in the stratosphere has been decreasing in recent years, ozone near the Earth's surface is on the increase. This ozone near the surface is undesirable because undesirable. We want it to absorb UV light. UV light is strong and causes cancer, skin cancer and stuff. It is D. It is D. And notice that obviously a lot of people must have read that as desirable instead of undesirable because only 62% got that correct that year. All right. So you've got to know these two things. You've got to know these two things. What is the difference between a primary air pollutant and a secondary air pollutant? So basically, if you got a chemical that's released from a source into the air and it's immediately considered to be a pollutant, like immediately, then that's a primary air pollutant. But if you've got a chemical that's released into the air, but then it has to react with water or some other chemical and then it becomes a pollutant, that would be a secondary air pollutant. So sulfur dioxide, it can cause problems as is, but it can also react with water vapor and turn into sulfuric acid. So the sulfur dioxide would be a primary, the sulfuric acid that it turns into would be a secondary air pollutant. So a lot of times they want you to know the difference between the two and give at least one example of each. So you don't have to know them all, just know, a couple for each one. All right. Y'all stop me if y'all have questions. Any questions so far? All right, so those criteria, air pollutants I told you about, these are the ones that are regulated by the U.S. Clean Air Act. There's a big push now to add CO2 to the list, but the fossil fuel industry is fighting that tooth and toenail. They're paying lobbyists big bucks to go to D.C. to fight it really hard. CO2 is a known greenhouse gas. That's the one that we're putting. There's just a new report that came out. We have hit, I think, over 300 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere, and it hasn't been that high in over hundreds of thousands of years, right? And we know that CO2 traps heat. We know that. We've proven that over and over and over again. And we know that the CO2 levels have increased. So, Anyway, so carbon monoxide. Why is carbon monoxide a concern? Say what? It is very dangerous to your health. Why is it very dangerous to your health? It can kill you. That's pretty dangerous. So this is a sad story, but it just proves a point. When I was y'all's age, I went to a church in Athens, and there was two men that always hung out in the back. Where most of the kids would sit, so they'd come in the back, and he would greet us, and he was the nicest guy, always smiling, always in a good mood, always glad to see you. And he had a daughter, he and his wife had a daughter that had moved to Mobile. The daughter was married and had kids, right? So Joe and Nell Wilburn were the names. They go down to Mobile over Christmas break to spend the holidays with them. And also, Joe was going to help his son-in-law weatherproof the house, and make it tighten up so it's more efficient and cut down the utility bill, electric bill, and all that stuff. And so they sealed up the house really, really good and tight. But what they didn't know was that they did know that they used gas, heat, and stuff. But they didn't know there was a leak, and it killed every single one of them. It killed Joe and Nell, their daughter, their son-in-law, and all the grandkids. Died in their sleep. Carbon monoxide. So hemoglobin, that is the protein that's in your red blood cells that carries oxygen, right? And unfortunately, it has a really high affinity for CO as well as O2. And so if CO is present, it will pick up carbon monoxide and carry it instead of oxygen. So basically you just go to sleep and then you die, right? So if you're going to weatherproof your house and tighten it up and insulate really well and all that stuff, and you have gas, just make sure that you've got a carbon monoxide detector. A lot of times that's part of code and regulations now in different cities and stuff, just for that reason, because it can be really, really bad. It's clear, it's odorless, you don't know. Some signs are you get dizzy, you get headaches, you get really sleepy, But anyway, and another thing that happens accidentally is, and seems like it's usually women more than men, but y'all know how sometimes you have a garage that's attached to your house, and you can go out to the garage from the house. So in the wintertime, people like to go out there and start their car and then maybe go finish putting on their makeup or whatever. And the garage door's closed, so carbon monoxide is building up. And more than one person has gone out there and then they find them there. Car's still running and they're slumped over. So it's a serious threat. So anyway, that was one of the reasons why it was one of the 6 criteria pollutants under the Clean Air Act. Nitrogen dioxide and other nitrogen oxides, they refer to those as NOx. because that X is a subscript. It could be a 1 or a 2 or a 3, you know, so they just call it NOx because all of them can react with water vapor and turn into nitric acid, right? Sulfur dioxide can turn into sulfuric acid. Ozone can be harmful to your lungs, you know, and it can cause lots of other issues as well. It contributes to photochemical smog. Lead, we already talked about. Lead can cause, what did we say that all heavy metals can cause? Learning disabilities, neurological damage, birth defects. That's another one. Every single one of them calls birth defects if you're exposed to it. And then suspended particulate matter. Basically, that's soot, right? When you burn stuff and that dust crap goes into the air, or soot, S-O-O-T. It's bad because, and the smaller they are, by the way, this was a test question one year, the smaller these suspended particulate matter is, the more dangerous it is. Because if y'all remember from, I don't know if y'all had anatomy and physiology or biology or 7th grade life science or whatever, but your trachea, right, your wind tube, what's it called? Windpipe, thanks. It's been a while since I taught that. It branches into 2 bronchi, right? And then those keep branching and branching until they dead end into those tiny little grape-like clusters called alveoli. Exactly. And so those are really thin membrane. And they have to be thin and moist because that facilitates the exchange of gases, CO2 and oxygen, right? So the smaller the particle, the deeper it can penetrate into your lungs and coat those alveoli, and then you're gasping for breath, right? So this, and you know, insurance companies look at how close people live to interstates because it affects health insurance, because it affects your lungs more the closer you live to interstates and cities that are highly populated and have a lot of cars or coal-burning power plants, because it can lead to bronchitis, emphysema, or COPD, chronic obstruction pulmonary disease. All right, so anyway, carbon monoxide, I've already said all this, so I think I'm going to skip most of it. 5.5 billion tons enter the atmosphere every year. So I'm going to keep going. I've said this. Now I'm going to keep going because I've said all this. Ozone, yeah. I didn't say ozone can damage plants. It does. Ozone can damage plants, and so it can not only affect the the trees and plants and everything that are just natural out there, but also crops. It cuts down on photosynthesis, so, and I think it messes up with the stomates. Remember what those are? Yeah, yeah, exactly. They're the holes on the bottom side of the leaves where O2 comes out, CO2 goes in for photosynthesis. So it messes those things up, and it decreases your crop output or production. All right, lead, we've already said this too. Accumulates in tissue, affects the kidney, liver, and nervous system, leading to mental retardation, and all those other things we said. We said all that is heavy metal. Okay, so electrostatic precipitators. I'm gonna do wet scrubber first. I should have put this one before this. Usually, when you burn coal or trash, you're gonna produce all this air pollution, and it's gonna go first through a wet scrubber, and usually then through an electrostatic precipitator. So basically, what a wet scrubber is, it's gonna spray water down from the top, and that is going to wash out the sulfur oxides and a lot of the particulate matter. And it can remove as much as 98% of the sulfur dioxide and particulate matter. A lot of times, like at the incinerator in Huntsville, they will add a lime slurry to it because by the time it gets to the wet scrubber, some of the SO2 has already turned into sulfuric acid. And so that lime is a base. It kind of helps neutralize it. But anyway, it's kind of like if anybody has really bad allergies, You know, whenever things start producing pollen in the spring or whenever, ragweed in the fall, if you'll notice that if it rains, your sinuses may clear up for a little while, you know, and that basically is because the rain washed out all the pollen and stuff. So it's the same idea. You're basically just washing out the air pollutants. All right, but here's the thing to keep in mind, and this is another test question on an FRQ. You got it out of the air, that's good, but now it's in the water. What are you going to do with it? Probably going to send it to a wastewater treatment plant. It's probably what you're going to do. And I don't know how Decatur is. Madison lets me bring my AP Environmental Science students to the drinking water treatment plant and the wastewater treatment plant. And I know you may think, oh, sewage treatment plant, that sounds like a great time. But it's really interesting. I mean, part of it does stink, but most of it does not. But it's really cool. You know, we have such a bad habit of flushing the toilet and it's flushed away. Well, one thing that a professor, really stuck in my head when I was at Auburn, he said, you know, there is no away. There is no away. You can't throw something away. You can't flush something away. It's going somewhere, you know, so you got to think about that. But anyway, this will probably go to a wastewater treatment plant and be treated there, unless there's a lot of toxic metals and it has to be disposed of as a hazardous waste, which just costs more money. And I already said this, we spend more and more time indoor. Indoor air is becoming a bigger and bigger problem. All right, so here's something, I tweaked this last night. I had some friends that called me and wanted my wife and I to go out to eat with them. And I said, no, I gotta look over these PowerPoints for these guys tomorrow. And I didn't tweak it too much, but I did include a map that I've been meaning to do for over a year now. But anyway, the major source of radon in houses in the United States is what? Have y'all heard of radon? What do y'all think it is? What? It is B. It is B. Less than half got that correct in 2003. This came from the 2003 exam. So it comes from rock, right? So if your house is built on bedrock that has radon, and it's a naturally occurring gas, it's clear, it's odorless, and it's radioactive, and it is the second leading cause of lung cancer, second only to smoking in the U.S. So we'll talk about that in a moment. All right, so the major human health problem related to radon, of course, is lung cancer. Only half got that correct. Second only to smoking. Okay, and this is what I added. And y'all take a look at this. This is, okay, the darker, like the red, is the worst. Y'all see where we are? Like right there.